The alarm screamed through the cockpit of the Meridian's Grace as Chen fought with controls that no longer responded. Red lights flashed across every panel, and the navigation system displayed nothing but static and error messages. She had been hauling agricultural equipment through what was supposed to be a safe transit route when everything went wrong at once. Come on, Sarah muttered, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering column. The ship shuddered violently as another piece of debris slammed into the hull. She had flown through the edge of an uncharted asteroid field, and now her vessel was coming apart around her. Through the viewport she could see a small moon growing larger by the second. Kelthra 4 according to the fractured readout. It was not her destination, but it was rapidly becoming her only option. The main engines were dead. Life support was failing. She had maybe 3 minutes to find somewhere flat to put down before the ship became her coffin. Sarah's hands moved on instinct, firing the emergency thrusters in short bursts to angle her descent. She had trained for this scenario 100 times in simulators back on Earth, but training never captured the bone-deep terror of real catastrophic failure. The moon's surface rushed up to meet her, and she could make out structures now. Buildings. A settlement of some kind. The impact was brutal. The Meridian's Grace hit the ground at an angle, skipped once like a stone on water, and then plowed through what looked like a garden before slamming into the side of a large transparent dome. Metal shrieked. Glass shattered. Sarah's head cracked against the headrest despite her restraints, and stars exploded across her vision. For several long moments she just sat there, breathing hard, checking to make sure all her limbs still worked. Her left shoulder throbbed where the restraint had dug in, and she could feel a warm trickle of blood running down from her hairline, but she was alive. The cockpit was a mess of sparking wires and broken panels, but the emergency door still functioned. She hit the release and stumbled out into chaos. The dome she had crashed into was massive, easily 3 stories tall and filled with what looked like an artificial forest. Trees with purple leaves swayed in a breeze that should not exist inside a structure. Small pools of water dotted the landscape, and the air tasted wrong, sharp and metallic on her tongue. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice cracking. "Is anyone here? I need help." A sound reached her ears then. Not the creaking of damaged structure or the hiss of escaping air, but something else. Crying. Multiple voices, high-pitched and frightened, coming from deeper within the dome. Sarah ran toward the sound, jumping over chunks of debris from her ship and pieces of the shattered dome wall. The crying grew louder and then she saw them. Children. At least 20 of them, huddled together in a clearing. But they were like no children Sarah had ever seen. Some had scales that shimmered blue and green. Others had fur in patterns of silver and gold. One had 6 arms and eyes that blinked independently. Another floated a few inches off the ground, its body seeming to shift between solid and translucent. They were all staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. And on the ground in front of them lay an adult alien, clearly their teacher. The being was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished stone and a face that reminded Sarah somehow of a gentle horse. Purple blood pooled beneath its body, and its breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. "Oh no," Sarah whispered, dropping to her knees beside the injured teacher. No. What can I do? How do I help you?" The teacher's eyes opened, focusing on Sarah with obvious effort. One long, delicate hand reached up and pressed something small and metallic into Sarah's palm. The being's mouth moved, producing sounds that meant nothing to Sarah's ears. Then the device in her hand vibrated, and a voice spoke directly into her mind. "Human. You are a human, yes? From Earth." "Yes," Sarah said quickly. "Yes, I'm human. I'm so sorry my ship crashed, I didn't mean to." "No time," the teacher interrupted, each word clearly causing pain. "I am Professor Thelen. These are my students, 23 younglings from 8 worlds. The crash, it damaged the biodome. Life support is failing. Can you see the panels on the walls?" Sarah looked where the professor indicated and felt her stomach drop. Several wall panels were flickering between red and yellow, and through gaps in the dome structure, she could see the moon's natural atmosphere beginning to seep in like fog. "The air outside is poison to all of us," Professor Thelen continued. "Communications are destroyed. Help will come, but not for many hours. I am dying. I can feel it. But the children must survive. You must save them. Please." "I don't know anything about alien biology," Sarah protested, panic rising in her chest. "I don't know what they need, what they breathe, what." "The translator will help. It connects to the Academy database. It will tell you what each species requires." The professor's grip tightened on Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "Humans are known for your endurance. Your ability to keep going when others cannot. I have read the reports from First Contact. You come from a world that tried to kill you for millions of years, and you survived by refusing to stop. Please, do not stop now. Save my students. Professor Thelen's eyes closed then, and the hand holding Sarah's went limp. The shallow breathing stopped. Sarah sat frozen for 3 full seconds, staring at the dead professor, before the weight of the situation crashed down on her. She looked up at the children, who were now crying harder, reaching for their teacher, calling out in languages she could not understand without the translator. The device in her hand vibrated again, and text scrolled across her vision, projected somehow directly into her eye. Biodome integrity at 47% and falling. Current atmospheric composition becoming toxic to 6 of 8 represented species. Estimated time until complete failure, 5 hours 43 minutes. Estimated time until rescue, 13 hours 20 minutes. 5 hours. She had 5 hours to keep 23 alien children alive in a failing structure on a moon she had never heard of, using technology she did not understand with no way to call for help. It was impossible. Any reasonable person would recognize that. Any sane person would accept the limitations of the situation and prepare for the inevitable tragedy. Sarah Chen stood up, wiped the blood from her forehead with the back of her hand, and looked at the crying children. The translator was already feeding her information, labeling each child with their species name and basic needs. Some needed more oxygen. Some needed less. Some needed humidity. Others needed it dry. Okay, she said aloud, and the translator carried her words to the children in their own languages. They looked up at her, confused and frightened. My name is Sarah. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we're going to get through this. All of us. Together. I promise you that. She had no idea if it was a promise she could keep. But she knew one thing for certain as she began running toward the damaged life support panels, her emergency response training from Earth kicking in. She was absolutely going to try. Sarah's hands moved rapidly across the damaged control panel, her fingers tracing wires and connections that made no sense to her Earth-trained mind. The translator device clipped to her collar fed her information in a steady stream, but knowing what needed to be fixed and actually fixing it were two very different things. Oxygen recycler compromised. Nitrogen filter at 20% capacity. Temperature regulation offline, the device announced in her ear. Behind her, the children had gone quiet, watching this strange human woman who moved with such determined energy. Sarah could feel their eyes on her back as she pulled open an access panel and stared at the alien technology inside. It looked nothing like the systems on her cargo ship, but the basic principles had to be the same. Air came in, got cleaned, went back out. She just needed to figure out which parts did what. A small voice spoke and the translator converted it to English. Are you really going to save us? Sarah turned to see a child with pale blue scales and enormous dark eyes standing a few feet away. The translator identified her as Zalara, a Chixian female, age equivalent to 7 human years. I'm going to try my best, Sarah said honestly. What's your name? Zalara. Professor Thelen said humans were weird. That you do things that make no sense. The child's head tilted to one side in a gesture that somehow conveyed both curiosity and doubt. He said you climbed the highest mountain on your world just to see what was at the top, even though many died trying. That's true, Sarah admitted, turning back to the panel. We're pretty stubborn that way. Can you do me a favor, Zalara? I need you to tell me which of your friends can breathe this air and which ones can't. The translator is giving me species names, but I need to know who's having trouble right now. Zalara moved away, and Sarah heard her speaking to the other children in a mixture of languages. While they talked, Sarah grabbed tools from an emergency kit she had found mounted on the wall. The tools were designed for alien hands, but she made them work, using a pry bar to open a sealed compartment that contained spare filter cartridges. The work was exhausting. Sarah's shoulder ached where the crash restraint had bruised it, and her head throbbed from the cut on her forehead. But she kept moving, kept working, because the moment she stopped would be the moment she started thinking about how impossible this all was. Miss Sarah? Zalara had returned with a small group. Kessex and 3 others are breathing funny. And Morva is turning gray. Sarah looked at the children Zalara indicated. One was a furry creature about the size of a human 5-year-old, his chest heaving with rapid breaths. The translator identified him as Thorn, a species that required higher oxygen levels than the dome was currently providing. Okay, I need you all to help me, Sarah said, making a decision. She pointed to a section of the dome that was still intact. We're going to make safe rooms. Small spaces where I can control the air better. It's easier to fix the air in a small room than in this whole big dome. Can you help me carry things? The children stared at her. Then Kesix, the small furry thorn boy, stepped forward. I can carry, he said in a voice that tried to sound brave despite the obvious fear. What followed was organized chaos. Sarah directed the children to gather anything that could be used to create barriers. Emergency shelter pods from the Academy's safety equipment. Large sheets of flexible plastic from what looked like an arts and crafts area. Rolls of what the translator called repair tape but reminded Sarah strongly of the duct tape she kept in her ship. She worked for 2 hours straight, building 3 separate enclosed spaces within the larger dome. Her human endurance surprised the children. They tired quickly in the degrading atmosphere, needing to sit and rest every 20 minutes. But Sarah kept going, her body burning through energy reserves in a way that would have been impossible for most of the species represented in that dome. How are you not tired? Asked a floating child named Pix, whose translucent body shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. Oh, I'm very tired, Sarah said with a breathless laugh as she sealed another seam with tape. But humans evolved to chase prey animals for days without stopping. We're not fast, but we don't quit. It's kind of our thing. She created a high-oxygen zone for Kesix and the others who needed it, using the biodome's emergency tanks and a complicated series of tubes she built from laboratory equipment. For the children who needed lower oxygen, she created a nitrogen-rich space. The rest could survive in the main area if she could just stabilize it enough. The translator kept feeding her information, teaching her which species needed what. Sarah memorized it all, her pattern recognition skills working overtime to sort through the complexity. It was like a massive puzzle, and despite the terror of the situation, part of her brain found it fascinating. By hour 3, she had all the children sorted into their appropriate zones and the air in each space stabilized. That was when she noticed Zalara had been following her the entire time, translating her instructions to the other children and helping organize the younger ones. You're a good helper, Sarah told the girl as they checked on each group. Professor Thelen always said I was good at explaining things, Zalara replied quietly. Then her voice cracked. I miss him. Sarah knelt down, ignoring the protest from her aching legs. I know, sweetie. I'm so sorry. He seemed like a wonderful teacher. He was. He taught us that all species are different but all matter the same. Zalara's large eyes blinked slowly. Are you scared, Miss Sarah? Terrified, Sarah admitted. But being scared doesn't mean we give up. It just means we have to be brave. And you've all been so brave today. The next crisis came at hour 4. The biodome's main structural support beam began to groan, metal bending under stress it was never designed to handle after the crash. Sarah studied it with growing dread, watching hairline cracks spread across its surface. She climbed up using maintenance ladders, dragging cables and support struts salvaged from her destroyed ship. The children watched from below as she worked 20 feet above the ground, wrapping and reinforcing the beam with everything she could find. Her hands bled from cuts and scrapes. Her arms shook from exhaustion. But she did not stop. You're going to fall. Kesix called up in his small voice. Probably not, Sarah called back, though she was not at all certain. And if I do, I heal pretty well. Humans are tough that way. When she finally climbed back down, her legs nearly gave out. Zalara and several other children caught her, their small alien hands surprisingly strong as they helped her sit. You need to rest, Zalara insisted. In a bit, Sarah promised, but even as she said it, her eyes were scanning for the next problem to solve. The translator was showing her that temperature regulation was failing now, and some of the children needed specific temperature ranges to survive. She pulled herself back to her feet despite the protests from every muscle in her body. There was still work to do. The rescue would not arrive for many more hours, and these children needed her to keep going. So she did. The warning came at hour 5 and it changed everything. Sarah was checking on the children in the high-oxygen zone when the translator began beeping urgently. She pulled it up to read the display and her blood went cold. The main breach in the dome wall, the massive tear her ship had created, was widening. The structural supports around it were failing faster than her calculations had predicted. Catastrophic collapse imminent in 90 minutes, the translator announced. Recommend immediate evacuation. Sarah looked around at the 23 children scattered throughout the dome in their carefully constructed safe zones. Evacuate to where? Her ship was destroyed. The academy building outside was too far away, and half these children could not survive in the open atmosphere even for the few minutes it would take to get there. She pulled up the dome's emergency systems on a working tablet she had found, studying the layout and trying to think. There had to be something she could do. There was always something. Then she saw it. Her ship's fuel cells were still intact, buried in the wreckage. If she could get to them and position them correctly, she could create a controlled explosion that would collapse part of the dome's outer wall inward, sealing the main breach. It was dangerous and probably insane, but it might buy them the time they needed for rescue to arrive. The problem was simple and terrible. The explosion would have to be triggered manually from outside the dome, in the toxic atmosphere of Kelthra 4. Sarah stood very still for a long moment, doing the math in her head. The atmosphere outside would kill her in about 8 minutes without proper protection. Her damaged emergency suit might give her 15 minutes, maybe 20 if she was lucky. The work she needed to do would take at least 12. Miss Sarah? Zalara had appeared beside her, those enormous dark eyes studying Sarah's face. Something is wrong. I can tell. Sarah knelt down so she was eye level with the child. Zalara, I need you to do something very important for me. I need you to keep all the other children in their safe zones no matter what happens. Can you do that? Why? Where are you going? The girl's scales rippled with patterns that the translator identified as distress. I have to go outside for a little while to fix something. But I'll be back. Sarah tried to make her voice sound confident, even though her hands were shaking. Outside. Zalara's eyes went wider. But the air outside is poison. Professor Thelen said so. I know. But I have a suit that will protect me. Sarah pulled the emergency suit from her ship's salvage pile. It was torn in 3 places and the helmet seal was cracked, but she had patched it as best she could with the repair tape. I'll be fine. She was not fine and they both knew it, but Zalara nodded slowly. Humans don't quit, the girl said softly, repeating what Sarah had told them earlier. That's right. We don't quit. Sarah pulled the child into a quick hug, then stood and began putting on the suit. Kessex and several other children had gathered, watching her preparations with growing alarm. When they realized what she was planning, they began to protest in a chorus of different languages, all translated into panicked English by her device. Don't go outside. You'll die. We can wait for rescue together. Sarah finished sealing her suit and checked the oxygen levels. 12 minutes, maybe 15. She looked at all their frightened faces and felt her heart break a little. Listen to me, all of you, she said, her voice firm but gentle. Where I come from, we have a saying. No one gets left behind. Do you understand? No one gets left behind. I'm not going to let you die if there's anything I can do to stop it. That's what humans do. We protect our pack. But we're not your pack, said Pix, the floating child. We're not even your species. Sarah smiled behind her damaged helmet. You became my pack the moment I found you. Now I need you to be brave a little longer. Stay in your safe zones. Zalara is in charge until I get back. She turned and walked toward the airlock before they could argue more, before her own fear could paralyze her. The translator was counting down the time until structural collapse. 78 minutes remaining. The airlock cycled and Sarah stepped out into the toxic atmosphere of Kelthra 4. Immediately, her suit's alarms began shrieking. The torn sections were not holding. Poison air was already seeping in through the cracks, burning her throat with each breath. She ran to her ship's wreckage, her vision already starting to blur at the edges. 12 minutes. She had 12 minutes. She could do this. The fuel cells were buried under twisted metal. Sarah pulled at debris with her gloved hands, the suit's limited strength assistance failing after the first few pulls. She threw pieces aside with raw human muscle, ignoring the pain in her injured shoulder, ignoring the burning in her lungs. 8 minutes gone. Fuel cells retrieved. She dragged them toward the breach, her legs feeling like lead weights. The explosion had to be positioned exactly right. Too close to the safe zones and she would kill the children. Too far and it would not seal the breach. Sarah's hands fumbled with the connections, her vision swimming. The toxic air was filling her suit faster now. She could taste metal and something sweet and wrong. 11 minutes. The connections were almost done. Just one more wire. Just one more. Her hands would not stop shaking. The simple act of connecting 2 wires became impossibly difficult as her muscles stopped responding correctly. Sarah bit down hard on her tongue, using the pain to focus and finally pushed the connection home. 12 minutes. The detonator was set. She had to get back inside. But when Sarah tried to run, her legs buckled. She crawled instead, dragging herself across the rocky ground toward the airlock. The dome seemed impossibly far away. Each meter felt like a kilometer. The explosion went off behind her, the shockwave knocking her flat. She could not hear the sound through her helmet, but she felt it in her bones. Metal shrieked and groaned. When she managed to look back, she saw that it had worked. The breach was sealed, the outer wall collapsed inward exactly as she had hoped. 15 minutes. Sarah reached the airlock and fell through as it opened. On the other side, 23 children stood waiting, their faces pressed against the inner door window. She could see them shouting, crying, reaching for her. The inner door opened and small hands grabbed her, pulling her inside. Sarah's helmet was yanked off and she gasped, trying to pull clean air into lungs that felt like they were on fire. The world was spinning. Zalara's face appeared above her, those big eyes swimming with tears. "You came back," the girl whispered. "You came back." "Told you," Sarah managed, her voice a raspy whisper. "Don't quit." Then the world went dark. She was only dimly aware of the rescue ships arriving 40 minutes later. Of the emergency medical teams who rushed in to find 23 alien children alive and safe, gathered around an unconscious human who had somehow accomplished the impossible. Of the children who refused to leave her side, who held her hands and sang her a Kelthran lullaby about stars that guide lost travelers home. Sarah heard none of it. But somewhere in her fading consciousness, she felt the warmth of small hands holding hers and she knew they were safe. That was enough. Sarah's eyes opened to soft blue light and the steady beep of medical equipment. For several confused seconds, she could not remember where she was or what had happened. Then the memories flooded back and she tried to sit up suddenly, her heart racing. "The children," she gasped. "Are they?" Gentle hands pushed her back down against the pillows. A being with silver fur and kind amber eyes appeared in her vision, wearing what looked like medical clothing. The translator on the bedside table activated automatically. "All safe," the doctor said in a soothing voice. "Every single child survived without serious injury. You may rest now, Sarah Chen. You have done enough." Sarah let out a long breath and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. They were alive. All of them. The impossible had somehow become possible. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked. 3 weeks. The atmospheric poisoning was severe. Your lungs were badly damaged. We had to use advanced regeneration treatments. The doctor's fur rippled in patterns that seemed to convey approval. "You are very lucky to be alive. Most species would not have survived 17 minutes in that atmosphere, even with a suit." 3 weeks. Sarah stared at the ceiling, processing this information. 3 weeks since the crash, since the desperate hours keeping those children alive, since the toxic air burning through her lungs. "Can I see them? The children?" The doctor's ears twitched in what might have been amusement. "They have been here every day waiting for you to wake. I will tell them, but first you should know something. While you slept, you became quite famous." "Famous?" Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" The doctor tapped a control panel, and a holographic screen appeared above Sarah's bed. It showed her own face, exhausted and covered in dirt and blood, surrounded by alien children in the biodome. The image had been viewed 6 billion times according to the counter in the corner. "The biodome's emergency cameras recorded everything," the doctor explained. "The sector news services obtained the footage. Your story has spread across 200 worlds." Sarah watched in growing horror as the screen showed clip after clip. Her jury rigging the life support systems. Her building the safe zones with duct tape and determination. Her teaching the children to say, "No one gets left behind," before she went outside to trigger the explosion. Her collapsing in the airlock while 23 children screamed her name. "Turn it off," Sarah whispered. "Please." The doctor complied and the screen vanished. "You do not seem pleased." "I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would do." "That is precisely what has caused such debate," the doctor said quietly. "Because most species would not have done what you did. Most would have calculated the odds and accepted the inevitable. But you refused to accept it. And now the entire sector is trying to understand what that means about humans." Over the next several hours, Sarah learned just how much her 3 weeks of unconsciousness had changed things. The footage had not just gone viral, it had sparked something much larger. Political debates raged across the sector about humanity and what their rescue meant for interspecies relations. A Chechen ambassador had called human behavior dangerously irrational and unpredictable. They argued that a species that would risk certain death on a small chance of success could not be trusted in diplomatic situations. A Thorn military commander had countered by declaring humans the finest warriors never to seek war, and had petitioned to establish joint training programs between human emergency responders and Thorn forces. The Kelthran Council, speaking for the empathic species that had built the academy, had formally adopted Sarah into their cultural family and declared the anniversary of the rescue a sector-wide holiday called Guardians' Day. Sarah listened to all of this with growing discomfort. She had not asked for any of this. She had just wanted to save some children. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, it burst open and 23 children of various species poured into the room in a wave of excited voices and bright colors. "Miss Sarah. You're awake. We knew you would be okay." Zalara reached her first, climbing carefully onto the bed to throw small scaly arms around Sarah's neck. "You came back again," the girl whispered. "Just like you promised." Sarah hugged her tight, tears flowing freely now as the other children crowded around the bed. Kessex pressed a carved wooden totem into her hand, his small furry face solemn. "Thorn protection symbol," he explained. "So you stay safe always." Pics floated above the group, their translucent body glowing with happy colors as they draped something around Sarah's neck. "Pics and light string. We make them for family." One by one each child presented a gift from their homeworld. Drawings and carvings and woven bracelets and crystals that hummed with soft music. Sarah accepted each one with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the love radiating from these small beings she had known for less than a day before everything went dark. "We learned English," Zalara announced proudly. "All of us. So we can talk to you without the translator." "You did." Sarah's voice broke. "All of you." 23 heads nodded in unison, and then they began talking all at once in careful accented English, telling her about the past 3 weeks. How they had visited every day. How they had drawn pictures for her hospital room walls. How they had refused to go home until they knew she was safe. "Our parents want to meet you," said a child with crystalline skin named Vex. "Everyone wants to meet you. There are reporters outside. And politicians. And the sector council wants you to come speak with them." "The council?" Sarah felt a spike of anxiety. "Why?" "They want to understand humans," Zalara explained. "Some species are scared of you now. They saw what you did and they think maybe humans are too dangerous. Too reckless." "We told them they're wrong," Kessex added fiercely. "We told them you're not dangerous. You're just, you." Sarah looked at all their earnest faces and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Her actions had consequences beyond the biodome, beyond these children. She had somehow become the face of humanity to hundreds of species, whether she wanted to be or not. "What do you think I should do?" she asked them. Zalara tilted her head thoughtfully. "Professor Thelen used to say that the best teachers are the ones who show, not tell. You showed the whole sector what humans are. Now maybe you need to explain it so they understand." "And if they don't want to understand?" "Then they're being silly," Pick said matter-of-factly. "You saved us. That's all that matters." If only it were that simple, Sarah thought. But she smiled anyway and nodded. "Okay. I'll talk to the council. But only if you all promise to visit me again soon." The children cheered, and for a moment, Sarah forgot about the politics and the fame and the debate raging across the sector. For a moment, she was just a woman surrounded by children she had saved, who had in turn saved something inside her. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way she had faced that failing biodome. By refusing to quit. The sector council chamber was the largest room Sarah had ever seen. It stretched upward for what looked like 100 meters, with seating areas arranged in circular tiers that held representatives from over 200 different species. Some sat in traditional chairs. Others floated in containment fields. A few existed as projected holograms from distant worlds. Sarah stood alone in the center of the chamber floor, feeling very small and very human. Her legs still felt weak from the weeks of recovery, but she had refused the offered hover chair. If she was going to do this, she would do it on her own 2 feet. The head of the council, a massive being that looked like living crystal, spoke first. The translator converted their deep, resonating tones into English. "Sarah Chen of Earth, you have been called before this council not to face judgment, but to help us understand. Your actions on Kelthra 4 have raised important questions about your species and their place in our sector community. We ask that you answer honestly. Are you an exceptional example of humanity, or are you representative of your species as a whole?" Sarah took a deep breath. She had practiced what she wanted to say, but now that the moment was here, the prepared words felt wrong. Instead, she decided to just tell them the truth. "I'm not special," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber's amplification system. "Back on Earth, there are millions of people who do what I did every single day. We call them firefighters because they run into burning buildings when everyone else is running out. We call them lifeguards because they dive into dangerous water to save drowning strangers. We call them paramedics and doctors and search and rescue volunteers and teachers." She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. "We even have a word for normal, everyday people who do these things. We call them parents. Because when a human decides someone is under their protection, especially a child, we become unreasonably stubborn about keeping them alive. A representative from the Chixian species stood, their scales rippling with skeptical colors. But your actions were not reasonable. You had a 17% chance of success according to our calculations. You risked certain death for an unlikely positive outcome. This is not logical behavior. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. It wasn't logical. But humans aren't always logical. We're pack-bonding omnivores from a death world. Do you know what that means? She did not wait for an answer. It means we come from a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill us. Ice ages that should have wiped us out. Predators that were bigger and stronger and faster than us. Diseases and droughts and disasters. And we survived all of it not by being the strongest or the smartest, but by being too stubborn to die and too loyal to abandon our pack. A thorn representative stood, their fur bristling with what the translator identified as approval. But the children were not your pack. They were not even your species. Sarah smiled sadly. That's the thing about humans. Our pack isn't limited to our own kind. We've bonded with wolves and turned them into dogs. We've made families with cats and birds and horses. We've risked our lives to save whales and elephants and trees. When a human decides you're part of their pack, your species doesn't matter. Only that you need help and we can give it. The chamber erupted in discussion, representatives conferring with each other in dozens of languages. Sarah stood quietly, waiting for them to process what she had said. Finally, the council head raised a crystal appendage for silence. Your explanation raises another concern. If humans form these bonds so readily, and if they will risk everything to protect those they have bonded with, does this not make them unpredictable? Potentially dangerous? Maybe, Sarah admitted. But let me ask you something. Would you rather have humans as friends or as strangers? Because I can tell you right now, those 23 children I saved? They're my family now. I'll be checking on them for the rest of my life. Their worlds, their families, their communities, they're all part of my pack now whether they like it or not. That's just how we work. A long silence followed. Then a small voice spoke up from the observation gallery. May I say something? Sarah turned to see Zalara standing at the railing, her small scales shimmering nervously. The council head gestured permission. Sarah told us something before she went outside to save us, Zalara said, her English careful and clear. She said, no one gets left behind. She taught all of us to say it. And then she showed us what it meant. She didn't leave us behind even when it would have been easier. Even when it would have been safer for her. The girl's voice grew stronger. My people, the Chixian, we are very logical. We calculate odds and make careful decisions. But Professor Thelen is dead because he calculated the odds of surviving until rescue and decided they were too low. Sarah didn't calculate. She just refused to accept that we would die. And that's why we're alive. Kessex appeared beside Zalara, his small furry face fierce. Thorn are warriors. We understand combat and honor. What Sarah did was the most honorable thing I have ever seen. She treated us like we were worth dying for, even though we were just children from species she had never met. If that is what humans are like, then I want them in our sector. One by one, all 23 children appeared at the railing, each speaking briefly about what Sarah had done and what it meant to them. The council listened in silence, and Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she heard their words. When the last child finished speaking, the council head was quiet for a long moment. Then they spoke. The council has reached a decision. Humanity will be welcomed as full members of the sector community. Furthermore, Sarah Chen will be awarded the Star of Kelthera, our highest civilian honor, and we will establish new emergency response training programs with human instructors. The chamber erupted in applause and various alien equivalents. But the council head was not finished. We also offer you positions, Sarah Chen. Sector Ambassador. Chief of Emergency Response. Even an instructor position at the rebuilt academy. What is your choice? Sarah looked up at the children watching her from the gallery, then around at the assembled representatives. Finally she shook her head. Thank you but no. I'm a freight pilot. I like the quiet of long hauls. I like the independence. I like the simplicity of getting cargo from one place to another. She smiled. But I will accept one job. I'll be honorary aunt to 23 very special children, if they'll have me. The children cheered, and Sarah felt her heart swell with love for these small beings who had changed her life as much as she had changed theirs. 6 months later, Sarah was back in space, piloting a rebuilt ship that the Kelthran government had renamed the Guardian. Her cargo hold was full of agricultural equipment bound for a mining colony, and her communicator was full of messages. Zalara had sent a video of her first day at the rebuilt academy. Kessex had forwarded a picture of him wearing a junior rescue volunteer uniform. Pix had transmitted a light song they had composed just for Sarah. As her ship passed near Kelthra 4, Sarah adjusted course slightly to fly over the academy. Below, she could see the memorial garden they had named Chen's Choice, where a new generation of children learned about the human who had taught the sector that heroism was not about being fearless. It was about being scared and doing it anyway. Sarah smiled and set course for the stars, carrying her cargo and her memories, knowing that somewhere out there 23 children called her family. And that was worth more than any title or position the sector could ever offer. She was just Sarah Chen, freight pilot. And that was exactly who she